The thing about weaving for me is it's a continual exploration of color and what am I going to do with it, how am I going to approach it. And I believe all of that definitely goes back to the many, many photographs I took over the years. I don't particularly take a photograph from the past and go, oh, that's nice, let me put all those colors together. In the long run, I can look back and find a photograph that relates to the colors I have put on the loom. And people always say, well, how did you become a weaver? And when did you decide you were going to do that? And my answer is, I didn't decide, I just never quit. And I think that's still true today. I've decided years ago that technology wasn't the way to go with a multi-harness loom. I think maybe in today's world I might have decided to go down that path, but I didn't see people using multi-harness looms 30 years ago that were doing work beyond what was done in industry. And unbeknownst to me, I just kept working with color. I think color's a subconscious thing. I've never quite thought of it that way, but I think that statement is pretty true. When I start planning colors, sometimes I'm not sure what's going to happen. I can remember years ago weaving on a rug when I lived in Charlotte and taught down there. And I thought to myself when I was weaving on it, I thought, where did these colors come from? They're really strange. I've never worked with this before. I don't know why I can remember this story, but I got the rug off the loom, and there's a lot of finishing work that has to be done. And I started on the finishing work, looked across the room and thought, well, it just matches the couch. And for some reason, I didn't realize what I was doing. That definitely goes back to the subconscious. Years ago, I had a teacher, and it was at Penland School of Craft, where I did learn, that was the start of my weaving. And I was having a hard time with color and how to put it together. And she said, well, come on upstairs. And we took all my color and put it down on the floor. And then I had a visual distance from looking at that color. Instead of looking at it close up, I could see it in a different way. And people say to me, why do you put yarn on the floor? Well, it still goes back to that visual distance, and I will take that yarn and move it around to see what's going to happen with it and play with the color in that way. Why does the weaver have more than one loom? Well, for me, I may put colors together and have a warp on the loom, but I'm not sure what the weft, the cross threads are going to be, and therefore I'm waiting around. I don't know whether it's for inspiration to strike or for me to get my act together, but in that way, I keep going. So in weaving, one of the things that happens when you're on the loom and you're weaving a length is you need to mark your measurement or you definitely will be lost. So maybe you want something 60 inches long and you forgot to mark it, and it ends up being 40 or 80. So I pin a tape on the textile and keep going, and then hope I don't take the tape and roll it in to the textile that's being woven. So what's happening right now is I have decided I'm stopping with the chenille thread, and then I'm going to put the tail in to the weaving, and then have the next thread that I'm using, which is going to be a wool silk yarn. And I picked up the wrong shuttle. They're the same color. It's a wool silk yarn, and now I'll take that tail and put it back in. So in textiles, in weaving, unless you want the knot as a part of your piece, you overlap threads and don't knot them. I have definitely done pieces where the knots become an element of the design. In this way, with using the chenille and the wool silk, when this is processed afterwards, the wool silk should, and I say should, because sometimes colors act differently, draw up, and therefore this scarf will have hills and valleys. So I'll do this for a short way and then switch to the chenille color again. And yeah, I just broke that with my fingers. It was easier than picking up the scissors. So there again, I'm going to overlap by putting the wool silk back in and overlap the chenille as I start on that. And you know, it's producing pieces not at a fast rate. Weaving isn't fast, though there are weavers that are pretty fast. And mostly if they're doing scarves on production, they're only using one color through the weft, and then you can get things done quicker. But I'm not a fast weaver. I just keep going. And this is as far as a loom and stringing up a loom, I work from what's called back to front. There are a lot of ways people can work. And what I say to people is study with more than one person. Take what you want, throw the rest away. I'm still learning things. Every once in a while, I'll come against something I haven't tried before or that I've seen and went, wait, why didn't I know that previously? When I choose to stop and start colors with this particular scarf, I kind of set that up in the first blocks of color and the stripe of the wool silk. And it's about the same every time. I don't pick up a measuring tape and measure it. In truth, people weave a lot of napkins and placemats, and I love them. I just buy them from people because I'm not that kind of weaver. And I think that's what people should realize too in textiles, is that you don't need to do everything. You can take advantage of what somebody else does. The biggest compliment to me has been the number of weavers who have purchased my work. Or recently, I traded with a weaver. She wanted, wanted something else of mine and talked about a trade, and I said, fine. That's a nice compliment to me, that she wanted what I had woven. And the way I worked with color, and she's also someone who's very precise with what she does, but she does a lot of things, and it was just great, truthfully. And in the sense of thinking about color, I go back to my thoughts of what happened many, many years ago when I was just learning to weave at Penland, and I was staying over part of a winter, and I had wound colors together to put on the loom. As I said, I was a beginner, and Bill Brown, who was the second director of Penland, and the reason I was introduced to the school was my sister had known him from Haystack in Maine and had come to help. And I had, as I said, I'd put these colors together, and Bill came up to the weaving room and he looked at them and he said, "Babe, but that's really nice. Now what are you gonna do?" And I think that thought is always there. You have a warp the threads that are coming toward you on the loom, and there are a lot of ways you can work with that and decide what's going to happen. For me, the constant interest in color is just seeing what's next. And as I referenced earlier, which on another statement is, it's all the photography I did. I wore out the rubber ring on a camera lens because I took so many photographs. Had to send the camera off to be cleaned. The story there is the man said to me, "You have a very sick camera." When I was doing so much photography, it was the landscape, it was flowers. I didn't think about weaving back then. Photography is my second love, and that's really going in the darkroom with developing my own images and then printing those in the darkroom. Darks, brights, lights. And that goes back to being a radiologic technologist. So when I go in the darkroom, I think I look at things differently than many people do in the beginning. I had a teacher tell me, a photography teacher, "You didn't tell me everything you should have told me." And I said to him, "One never assumes." And I still love it. I took a 8-week photographic class 2 years ago. I would do it again, just so I can go in the darkroom. And the essence of that class was learning to use the 4x5 camera. So what really all that brings up too is, as a weaver, I don't just weave. I've had book arts classes. I've had metal classes years ago. And you're taking yourself away from what you're doing and learning something else. And it's not that I know what that'll bring back to weaving, but I know it brings stuff back to weaving because you've gotten away from it. And when you come back, you look at things differently. I came at all this at the back door, truthfully, but because I didn't go to art school. And part in the sense of doing the weaving and starting with that, I talked just now about not going to art school. Years ago, I was fortunate to be in a school where we had art, but the teacher got up in the front of the room and told everybody in the class they needed to paint and draw like 2 of the students. And one of those was my sister. And being a twin, I figured I couldn't do anything. So that was a story my mother never knew until I was an adult and told her then. But that's why I talk about I just fell into the weaving and kept going. I think that's that the experience of being, which I thought was like the 7th grade. Cynthia said it was the 5th. I don't remember which grade it was. But, I just remember what happened. And as far as teaching later on went, when I had to go evaluate students when I taught at the university that were being certified K through 12, I actually didn't give one student a passing grade. And when I was in the classroom with her, and she ignored this young student, it was a little boy, that had looked at his piece of paper and was going all over the place with what he was doing. It was very creative, but it wasn't what the teacher referenced at that point. And anyway, I got the student, fortunately she didn't have to work in the summer, to go volunteer at a community center during the summer so that she would understand more about people and how they work and help them with their art in a different way. And so she came back the next semester and took the class again and thanked me for showing her a different way for people to be able to work. I love to teach, but also whatever way somebody else teaches, you can learn something from them. Even if you've been weaving for a very long time, or doing pots or books or iron, any of it. Just keep going. So now I'm rolling up this scarf, and if I didn't have a measurement on here, I'd be kind of lost. So sometimes I'm lost anyway. Yeah, definitely I decided beforehand what this is going to be because of what the material is. When you weave, all material acts differently, and some people weave with the same yarn all the time, whether it's cotton or wool or rayon or viscose or tencel, and I'm kind of all over the place trying things. And if some of the yarns are new to me that I really have not worked with before, I'll do a sample and wash it and finish it. Sample is just that. How's the yarn going to act? And yes, the yarn's expensive, but your time is what's also into it. And if you're not sure how the yarn's going to act, then you've got your time and the expense of the yarn, and it's all gone down the drain. I always tell students you've got to weave to learn to weave. I know that there are people that teach weaving and you go in and weave a scarf, but for beginners, when I teach, it's weave a sample. And then it's not precious. It's for you to play with and decide what happens next. And maybe you've got a car rag. It's a piece of cloth that didn't quite work. And that's the way you learn. As far as weaving goes, I love teaching. I still do. I have recently had, and not very often, several students for 5 days. And I kind of put out a program to them when I learn who they are and how they work. I don't promise things from the beginning because everybody works differently. With one person, she only did one thing in the 5 days, but she was happy with it. She had success. With another person, she wove 3 different pieces that were a couple yards long on each one of them. But that goes back to people's learning styles are different, and it's fine to just go at their pace, not at mine. Years ago, I had a young man in my class of, I think, 18 students at Penland, and he came to me and he said, after the first project, he said, I want to make tubes. And I said, well, that's a double weave. Let me show you how to do that and give you the threading and treadling for it. And so he started setting up his loom, and one of the other students came to me and said, he can't do that. And I said, excuse me? What are you talking about? And she was referencing this young man. And I said, he's fine, don't worry. You know, what I'm saying there is if somebody's ready for something, I won't hold them back. When I teach, I'm not a formula teacher that I'm going in and everybody's doing the same thing. Maybe in a 3-day workshop, if I'm teaching overshot or teaching beginners, then that's a little different. And then, you know, for that reason, I'm not somebody that has gone all over the country teaching the same thing. I want people to think about what are you doing and why do you want to do it after you learn to weave. You know, in the sense that another student, another story, she came to me and said, I want to weave like an Indian. And she had a reference to an Indian tapestry, and it had symbols in it. And I looked at her and I said, you're not an Indian, but let's go a little further than that. And would you please come back to me with images that relate to your life and what you're interested in? And then we'll see about your project and how it's approved. A lot of people want to know how does Edwina pick color? Well, sometimes I don't know. But the other thing that I've done through the years is I think I've looked in the distance and beyond as to what is happening in the atmosphere or the scene where I am. And I'm gathering things without knowing it. But I've also been known, I can remember doing a residency in New York State years ago, and we were sitting there at a concert, which was one of the pluses of doing the residency there, where they had the art and they had performance and being able to go to things. And I pulled a piece of paper from my carry-on and purse or wallet and started writing down color in the distance of what was happening with the sunset. And it's not that I take that piece of paper and later go to thread and figure out that I want to weave those colors. Somehow it's back there. But I mean, I could go today in parts of my house and find scraps of paper with colors written on them that I was thinking about weaving. And I do talk about dark, light, and bright, which I've done for years with students. Where I started with that comment, I'm not sure. But for me, it works. Even looking at the threads that are on the loom right now, I've got dark, light, and bright. I mean, I've got dark purple. I've got the kind of chartreuse yellow variegated yarn that pops out. Another thing that I've always talked about is you want to make your piece sing. And part of that is something in there that people didn't think you should or would put in, but it makes the piece. Without it, for me, it doesn't make the piece. Then again, with what I'm doing, I don't know, I'm trying to make it work, but I'm also trying to make a little surprise in there of something that may or may not happen. There are people that weave and they do fabulous work. When I was a resident artist at Penland, I shared studio space with Adela Akers, who's a fabulous weaver. And if you looked on her side of the room, we shared a big room, and there was maroons and grays and blacks and whites. And she'd look over at me and she'd go, "Edwina, you're a mess." And I said, "Yes, I know." Because I had a lot of different colors and a lot of different textures. And there again, part of it was I wasn't sure what I was doing, but I was learning. And, you know, then again, maybe I took horsehair yarn and 1/4-inch manila rope and wove an old pattern. I don't seem to stay in the same place, and you know, it's part of learning. It's part of being interested in different things. It's the essence of taking those colors and working with them in a different way that have been seen in nature. The other way in thinking about color, people go, "Well, do you go to the color wheel?" Well, yes, I taught the color wheel when I was teaching full-time. Do I look at the color wheel? No. Somehow it's life's experiences and the way that I end up working and the way I look at things. Sometimes I don't even know where it comes from. It becomes intuitive because I've done it for so long. And people will say, how did you know you were going to do that? Well, I probably didn't know. I just did it. There again, it's other things that I've done that influence. I've made handmade books. I've made lots of paste paper, which is taking colors and putting a lot of colors together on a piece of paper and design, so that you can cut that up and make it as a cover for your book. Those are influences that also happen, you know, subconsciously. There again, I've needle felted images and projects that I've done through the years that could be framed and put on the wall. And some of those images came from doing a residency in South Carolina, where I went in the woods and probably took photographs of things that were growing and happening there, and then turned those into needle felted. Basically, it ends up being a picture that can be framed or sewn on afterwards. Needle felting is taking the wool and abusing it, hot and cold. Instead of hot and cold, it's little needles that have barbs on them like a fish hook, and it mashes all the yarn together. So it's another way that I've worked with color. Right now I'm sitting here trying to, working on a tapestry piece, and tapestry to most people means the warp does not show. The warp here happens to be linen, and the weft is a major part of what's going on. I think with thinking about it, people work in different ways, and it's still a tapestry if the warp does show. For whatever I'm doing, I'm working with color, and often textures I'll pull into the element of what goes on. With the colors I'm putting together now, some of them definitely relate to fall and what happens in the area in which I live. Thinking there again, when you look at fall and the colors that happen, I'm waiting for winter when it looks like there's frost on the mountain and the sky becomes clear, because truthfully the winds blow out the pollution that's around and the trees look like fringe on the top. I have not taken one of those pictures and done a particular tapestry for that, but I know that there are influences that happen by looking at nature and what happens in nature. There's people work in different ways with tapestry, and some of the techniques are often used if you're making a rug. Some of the tapestry techniques are. In other ways, well, right now I'm just going back and forth, and I can use the beater, but I can get to a certain area if I want something different to happen and do an eccentric element within that, and then I would use a tapestry beater, which is like a great big fork with holes in it, except it's wood. It's pretty big. I don't think you could eat with this. So I'm making butterflies to move back and forth with the yarn, and the way the yarn is moving, if the yarn is coming toward the other yarn, then if you're going to keep moving in a straight line, then that's when you can move the color back and forth. Or you could cut and reset it as to which way it's going. And then you'd be able to move the yarn in different ways. So to work on something like this, I've put a lot of butterflies and colors around, and I don't have a particular design in mind. I'm letting the colors flow and the design flow from row to row. It's fun that way. Just keep going. In thinking about doing a tapestry and putting colors together, the way that I work is usually not from a cartoon that's done, though years ago I did a very large piece and I had a cartoon for that. For this, I'm working intuitively, even though it would truthfully be faster if I drew it out ahead of time. But in some ways, that's not the way my head works. I'm not sure the way it works sometimes. But I've got colors that I've laid out. Some of them, I'll lay them out on a bench, or, if the bench is too small, I'll pull a big piece of board out and put them on that, and that's the way that color with the design is going to go. And then it's intuitive how long something goes, and when I change color and put it up. On this piece, I've started with 3 colors, and now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different colors going across. So I keep changing all along. I mean, all I can say is that's me. How it happened, I don't know. Just keep working. So a lot of people say, how do you choose what you're going to weave next? And, sometimes I'll look at a few things that I've woven previously and, maybe I'm low on scarves. Sales in textiles are sort of few and far between sometimes. And I never was one to think that I would weave enough that I would apply to one of the big craft shows. Many of those weavers have someone to help them with production, because weaving's slow, it's not fast. Some people who make garments do that by themselves, but that's also a higher priced item when you think of things. Going back to what I'm going to weave, and if you look at the piece that's on the loom right now, it's totally different in color, but still going back to the dark, light, bright, you can pick it out in this warp. And did I pick it out on purpose? I probably did, but it was back there in my subconscious, and I don't even know how it happened. The other thing is the textures of this are totally different. So the feel of this piece when it's finished will be different. It's actually silk and cotton and rayon, all of those threads are within this piece. And here, going back and forth, I've gone under a thread instead of over it, so I'll back up and correct that. One of the things about weaving is people say, well, how do you warp your loom? In truth, it doesn't matter how you get the thread on the loom, it's what you do with it afterwards. And my advice is always study with more than one person. Take what you want, throw the rest away. As far as weaving for what I do what's called back to front. So the threads go on the back beam, and then they travel onto the warp beam, and so that you can weave. When you run your shuttle back and forth and get in a mess, just take it apart and start again. It's easier. It's exactly what happened to me just now. So I'm going to overlap these threads when I put the things back together and start weaving. This is actually a silk that I'm using for the weft. And then every once in a while, I want to put a little surprise in there. So I've got a shiny yarn, looks kind of like gold. So I'll put that through for a few shots on and off. And right now you can't see it, but it'll be a hidden surprise. When people are wearing it, you'll see a little glitter. And that's what's fun about playing with the glitter and what's going to happen with it. So it's because it's a really thin yarn and may break, then I'm inserting it in the same row as the silk yarn. So if I'm going to go 3 or 4 rows up on the edge, I'm going to catch that shiny gold yarn so that it isn't a loose loop that's there. So I'll do this 3 to 5 times, and then move on to taking it off, and then just move on to doing several rows of the silk again. It's fun to put a little surprise in what you're doing. Somebody goes, how did you know to do that? And I was like, well, you wanted a little bling. So we're making some bling in here. And as with the other piece, I have a measuring tape, so I know how long this piece is. Hopefully I've written down how long the warp is, so then I know. I spend a lot of time putting colors together, so what I want to be able to do is figure out, okay, are there two pieces on the warp? Are there three? Are they the same size? Or did you calculate differently and you're not sure? It all works. So this way I'm tucking the end in before I cut it off. And I don't have the scissors there, so I always have a knife in my pocket. I'll have to get up and get the scissors. But this way I can cut it off. It's like, what are you doing with a knife in your pocket? Well, I needed it. And your weaving width on, when you're weaving cloth, is not to go all the way from the breast beam all the way to where the beater is, because your sweet spot is sort of in the center. And this counterbalance loom, it's an old loom, found it in somebody's garage and put it back together. Got new ropes where I needed new ropes for it. And with working with a lot of color and simple, which can be complicated, for harness patterns, what happens is I just keep going. One of the things about weaving and teaching is there's a lot that comes up where students want information: who, what, when, where, why. And with my crazy background, as I said before, being a radiologic technologist and doing photography classes, that definitely influenced that part of it. But the other thing that influences my teaching is I worked in a very well-run craft shop in Atlanta one Christmas season for 2 to 3 months. And so I learned more about the sense of what happens in a craft shop and how do you sell work and what does the owner do. If you showed up without an appointment to see the owner, there were 2 owners, and one of them or both of them looked at new work that was coming in. Woe be unto you. So it's the business practice of being in the arts and what would happen. Also, on Tuesdays, when one of the owners went to get her hair done, I think she sat underneath the dryer to figure out what Mary and I could do when she got back from the beauty parlor. And most of all, it was picking up art objects and looking at you and handing it to you and going, float this. And that meant you find another place for it to be. And so that was a lot of good information, which I certainly didn't know was happening because I didn't know I would end up being a teacher at a university for 25 years. I think when I think about my artistic life and what I've done or what I might do in the future, I'm kind of doing the same thing I did a long time ago, and that's I will decide that it's time to weave a few blankets, and because I spend so much time putting the colors together for a warp, I'm really usually doing 2 or 3 on that warp, which are the threads that come toward you on the loom. And each one will have a different feeling to it. Maybe one will be gutsier than the other because I'm using thicker weft threads. And maybe one is dark and one is light. And that's a simple way of talking about it. Years ago when I was teaching full-time, I gave myself a project of weaving rag rugs. I mean, it seems like it's really easy to weave a rag rug, but it's the beat and it's the set, S-E-T-T, how many threads per inch, and the thickness or thinness of the weft threads. So, I probably did 12 or 15 rag rugs to help figure it out and be able to present more to my students. I'm not a real technical person. If somebody gets into technique and wants more help that way, I go, wait, let me call. And I can call somebody to get a little advice that way. Another thing about weaving is what are you going to weave, or what are you going to do in art? And what I always say is you need to put yourself into it and make it part of you. And another way to think about it, if it's something you want to keep, then you've really put yourself into it. Many years ago, I judged an exhibit in Florida as part of a Florida conference. And during that conference, at the end, I was calling out names to give awards to. And I called out this young lady's name, and she had a flushed look on her face. And she came up to me and she said, I didn't do this to enter a show. I did it for me. And I said, that's what you should always do. Put yourself into what you do. And so that was a fabulous outcome that I didn't expect, but hopefully it taught people in the audience something, and it taught her something. I think people wonder sometimes how you keep going with what you're doing, and maybe I just have an interest in a lot of different areas of the arts, and I don't know whether it's I was tired of weaving or I just decided to get back into some of the other things that I'd done. So I've done things like stop and take an 8-week photography course, because photo to me is my second medium. And I love doing glass beads too, but I've taken book arts and slipping back into something that's totally different. You don't realize that it's going to influence what you go back to, whether it be photo or weaving, or doing paste paper and playing with color to make handmade books. They all contribute to what you're doing. And I'm not sure whether I stopped and took those classes just because of that, or because I wanted to get out of the studio. I just kept going. I didn't sit and, I know people meditate, that's good for you, but I've never done that. I think my meditation is sitting at the loom or winding colors. Years ago, there were several deaths in the family, kind of one right after the other. And for the second one, I got a call that says, are you coming to Memphis? And I said, not today. And I wound warps and put color together for a future project. I couldn't get on the plane and go anywhere. And so, I've taken care of myself in different ways that way. And if there is a point in time when I haven't been in this studio, I kind of say to myself, what do you think you're doing? Get back in this studio and I'll go figure out something to do. Weaving is slow to sell. It's not, people who do tapestries and commissions, they're not necessarily weaving all the time because they're out trying to figure out what their next project is going to be. For me, I love seeing a stole or a scarf being worn, and that completes the piece, to see somebody walking around in it. Years ago, a painter friend I'd done a piece for, a ruana, which is a South American garment, and she, when I gave her that piece, she looked at me and, said thank you. And later on, she came back to me and she said, there are 48 colors in that piece. And I said, really? I mean, I didn't count. I was just putting colors together. And subsequently, she was at the Renwick in D.C., and somebody came up to the back of her and said, you've got an Edwina Bringle on. And it's like, and I looked at her and I said, that didn't happen, did it? And she said, yeah, it did. And I said, well, that's pretty amazing. And that's all I said about it, because I couldn't believe that happened. I mean, it also happened to a painter friend who bought a piece from me, and that happened to her in an airport. But that was kind of fun. And that was also back when people on the airport wore a little bit different clothes. This loom that I'm weaving on right now is called a Fireside. That was the manufacturer of it many years ago. And a jack loom means when you step on the treadles, the harnesses go up, whereas the one of the previous or two that I was working on are counterbalance, and so that's a balance system. What loom you use often depends on what project you're doing. For this, the reason I'm doing a blanket on here or have a big loom is because I like doing blankets, and this will weave 52 to 53 inches wide. I think this piece is 52. It's wool, so as long as it's set correctly, S-E-T-T, and woven correctly, by the time it's finished, meaning it gets washed when it comes off here, the feel of the piece will be different, because many yarns are made with substances that are in it to be able to spin the yarn. When I was in a class recently, I'll still take classes, even weaving, because it's interesting to see how somebody teaches. And you always, you're doing things you wouldn't stop and do at home. And I was showing pieces I had done when they came off the loom, and 3 of the other students looked at me and said, I didn't like that before. And I said, well, do you want to talk about that a little more? And she said, well, when it was on the loom, I didn't like it. Did you know that would happen? And I said, yes, I did. And what I knew is that when it got washed, the threads, because they were wool would come together differently, and the thread would kind of bloom. And the texture and feel of it would be totally different. And this goes back to teaching and looking at students and going, you need to do a sample. And they go, I don't want to do a sample. And I said, well, save you time and money if you would do the sample and begin to try to figure out what it is you really want to do. I said recently I was doing something in silk, and I looked at myself and thought, well, you messed up because you've done a sample of this before, but where are your notes? And I always tell students, do as I say, not as I do. Please make notes and keep records. And I'm bad about it. And that's why I'll have to turn around and do a sample again. I don't mind doing that, because you can always learn something from it, but I do waste a bit of time that way sometimes. I know in my weaving, I'm bad about putting a lot of different kinds of material together, and kinds even is in the, thinking about wool. Maybe it's thick, maybe it's thin, maybe it's 2-ply, maybe it's 3-ply. And if I'm going to mix all those in a warp, I need to think ahead about what's going to happen with that when it gets washed. The scarf I was working on the other day. I know that I put wool silk in there along with chenille, and my thought is when it gets processed, and I have done this previously, the wool silk will shrink up and then cause textures in that scarf. And also, well, I really like the feel of wool, and that's why I like weaving with it. Now, the world has changed. I used to do wool scarves all the time, but now, unless you ride a motorcycle or you're going to go to Minnesota or upstate New York, you probably don't want wool. And I do spinning. I love to spin, and I'll take that yarn and make a hand spun piece with the wool in the warp and the weft. And you know, that's something different, you know, that somebody probably around here doesn't want, but it's something I wanted to do, and I had a good time doing it, and eventually somebody will probably want it, and that's fine.